The text says his face changed. Not his expression, the material his face was made of. 2 Enoch, chapter 22, 1 verse. The translator working from the Slavonic had to sit with it because there's no clean English word for what the original language says happened to his skin. He went with the appearance of my face was changed. That's the safe reading. The word underneath is closer to replaced. Like a surface that got stripped off and something else was put down in its place. I want to read you what happens before that line. Skip the theology, skip the meaning. I want to talk about what it describes happening to a body in order when that body gets too close to what the text calls the face of God. There are 5 stages. The text presents them in sequence, the same sequence, in documents written centuries apart in completely different languages. And the last stage is the one that made me stop working on this for 2 weeks because I couldn't figure out how to say it out loud without it sounding like I'd lost my mind. Here's the first stage. 1 Enoch chapter 14. Enoch is walking towards something. The floor beneath him is crystal. He says that specifically. The walls are crystal. The ceiling is fire and stars moving together. He doesn't say it's beautiful. He doesn't say he's afraid. He describes the surfaces the way someone describes a building they walked through and knew they shouldn't have been inside. Not because of a feeling, but because the materials were wrong for any place meant for a person. And then he says the air changed. He doesn't mean the temperature, he means the air itself. As if the atmosphere around the thing he's approaching is made of different material than the atmosphere everywhere else. That's the room. He hasn't seen anything yet. He's just in the building. R.H. Charles translated chapter 14 in 1906 and noted something in the margins that nobody picked up for decades. The Ge'ez word Enoch uses for what's inside that room, the stuff he's breathing, isn't the same word used for air anywhere else in the text. It's a word that shows up later in the astronomical chapters for what sits between celestial bodies, the space between the sun and the moon. Enoch uses that word for the air in this room. Whether Charles caught the implication or not, he didn't write about it. He translated it as air and moved on. If you've ever walked into a room and known something was wrong before you could see it, that's what he's writing about. Except the thing that's wrong is that the air isn't air anymore. It's something else, and he tells you exactly what it smells like. Nothing. The room has no smell. He mentions it once. A strange thing to notice, a stranger thing to write down. I haven't told you what stage 4 does. We'll get there. The passage I'm covering next comes from the same section of the throne room. It's worse. Subscribe, it's coming. That's the only time I'll say it. I'm John Blackwell. This is the Black Mythora. I sat on this one because every version I wrote came out sounding like science fiction. It isn't. It reads like a medical report filed by someone who doesn't have the words for what happened to him. Now, before I go further, if you're genuinely interested in having your own personal reading, I've put it together on my website. You put in your birthday and it tells you everything about your current life. And also, just for your kind information, we're limiting the copies to 300 and only few left, so grab it before it gets sold out. The link is in the description or scan this QR code. Before I get into stage 2, I need to explain something about the word glory, because it changes everything that comes after. When you hear that word in English, you think of brightness, light, something impressive to look at. That's not what the Hebrew says. The word is kavod. It comes from a root that means weight, mass, physical heaviness. When the text says the glory of God filled the temple, it is not saying the temple got bright. It is saying something with physical mass entered the room and pressed down on everything in it. Christopher Rowland published a book in 1982 called The Open Heaven, where he traces this idea through every throne vision in Second Temple Jewish literature. Ezekiel sees it, Enoch sees it, same phenomenon, same physical behavior. In every account, kavod behaves like a substance, not a light effect. It has pressure and heat. It pushes things out of the way. Andrei Orlov at Marquette spent years on Second Enoch specifically, and he points out that the transformation Enoch goes through is described in the same language you'd use for metalworking, heating and recasting. The text treats the human body like raw material being processed. That matters because of what comes next. Stage 2, Enoch is inside the building now. He's past the crystal floors. And the text says his body starts reacting. 1 Enoch 14, verse 13, he says he was shaking. Verse 14, he fell on his face. He doesn't describe fear. He describes a physical force pushing him down. R.H. Charles translated this in 1906 and used the phrase, "I fell upon my face," and left it at that. Michael Knibb at Oxford, 70 years later, added a note that the Ge'ez carries a secondary sense closer to, "I was thrown down." The difference matters. One is a man overcome by awe. The other is a man hit by something. Stage 1 was the room. Stage 2 is the body starting to fail. Stage 3 is where it actually breaks. Tell me in the comments if you've read this passage before, because I hadn't, and I've spent 4 years in this text. 1 Enoch chapter 71, verse 11. The verse everyone skips because it sounds like poetry. My whole body melted and my spirit was transformed. Charles published that line in 1906 and moved on to verse 12. Nickelsburg, in his 2001 commentary, gave it 2 sentences. I tried to find who, if anyone, wrote more than 2 sentences about this verse between 1906 and 2001. 95 years, I couldn't find a single dedicated treatment. I might have missed one. My gaze is non-existent and my access to German language scholarship has gaps I haven't been able to close. But in English and French, as far as I can tell, nobody stopped on this verse. The Greek fragment, what little survives of it, uses a word that means dissolved. Not metaphorically, the word is used elsewhere for wax near heat, for snow in direct sun. The body doesn't shut down, it loses structure, the way a solid loses structure when enough energy passes through it. Nickelsburg noted this but didn't push on it. Nobody pushed on it because the next verse moves on to something else, and the commentaries followed the text forward, instead of stopping to ask what kind of event would produce that description. He had no imaging equipment, he had no radiometer, he had no concept of electromagnetic radiation as a category, no framework for thinking about energy in terms of wavelength or tissue absorption. He didn't know what a cell was, and he describes biological tissue losing its structural integrity in the presence of an energy source, in the same order with the same physical logic that modern radiology uses to describe acute exposure to high energy fields. The environment changes first, then the surfaces of the body react, then the deeper structures fail. He got the sequence right, not close, not roughly, not similar if you squint. Right, the order in which a biological system breaks down under energy exposure depends on the density of the tissue. Skin first, then fascia, then organ walls, then the structural proteins that hold everything in position. Enoch describes it in that order. He calls it different things. He uses words from a dead language. But the order is the same. The question is how. I don't know. That's the whole reason I'm making this video. I know the chapel where one of the oldest Ge'ez copies of this passage sits. It's in Aksum, northern Ethiopia, in the compound around the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. The building was rebuilt in the 17th century. The manuscript predates the building by at least 400 years. The room it's kept in is about 10 feet by 12 feet. Stone floor. I've seen photographs. Not relevant to the passage itself, I think about it sometimes, what it's like to be in a small room with a text that describes the human body dissolving. If you're still watching, you should be, because stages 1 through 3 are the setup. They are the part that sounds possible, the part you could explain with literary convention or religious rhetoric or borrowed imagery from older Near Eastern traditions. What comes next doesn't fit any of those boxes, and that's not my opinion. That's a structural observation about the text. The language changes, the tone changes, the writer shifts from describing an experience to describing a procedure. That brings me to stage 4. This is the section I couldn't get past because I kept rereading it for 2 weeks. I kept putting it aside. Because stage 4 says he didn't die. 2 Enoch chapter 22, different text, different century, different language entirely. The original is Slavonic, not Ge'ez, not Greek, not Aramaic, a completely separate manuscript tradition preserved by a completely separate set of hands. And it describes the same event, the same sequence, the same physical process happening to the same person. Except this version keeps going past the point where First Enoch stops. Michael the Archangel strips Enoch of his earthly garments. That's the text's phrase, earthly garments. And Orlov argues it doesn't mean clothes, it means the body, the biological body, the thing that melted in chapter 71. Michael removes it, then he anoints Enoch with oil. Then he dresses him in what the Slavonic calls garments of glory. And Enoch says, I looked at myself and I had become like one of his glorious ones, and there was no observable difference. Meaning, whatever he was made of now, it looked the same as what the angels were made of. He couldn't tell himself apart from them. Read that again. The body fails, it dissolves, and then it's replaced. The text doesn't say healed or restored, it says replaced. A different thing made of different material, something that matches what was already there. The text even specifies that the transition happens fast. It's not gradual. Orlov points out that the Slavonic uses a verb tense that implies completion, not process. It was done before Enoch finished noticing it was happening. What would you call that? Because the text doesn't call it resurrection. It doesn't call it death. It describes a material process with 5 steps and an output, and the output is a different body made of different material. The old body is gone. The new one is standing in the same spot, and nobody in the text asks whether Enoch is still Enoch. Comment on this if you've ever read chapter 22 of 2nd Enoch, and notice that it reads more like an engineering spec than a religious vision. Stage 5. This one is quick, and it's the one that made me stop. Both texts, the Ethiopian and the Slavonic, describe what the new body can do. In 1st Enoch, after the transformation, Enoch covers distances that would take lifetimes to walk. He crosses regions of the heavens that take days to describe. His body doesn't tire or need rest. In 2nd Enoch, he's given the ability to write at speeds he couldn't write before. The text says he wrote 366 books in 30 days. That's just over 12 books a day. The old body could not have done that. The text is specific about it. The new one can because it isn't made of the same thing. And notice the number, 366 books. The Enochic calendar has 364 days. Add the 2 intercalary days that VanderKam identified in the astronomical book, the ones that keep the solar year from drifting, and you get 366. 1 book for each day of the corrected year. The text doesn't say that connection out loud, it just uses the number and leaves it sitting there. A pattern or a coincidence. I marked it and moved on. Here is what I can't get past, and I'll tell you why and then I'll leave it alone. The songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice, found at Qumran, Cave 4, fragments catalogued as 4Q400 through 4Q407. Written in a different century than either Enoch text, by a different community, in a different location. Possibly without access to either version of Enoch, though scholars like Emil Puech and Florentino García Martínez have argued about the degree of connection for decades. And the songs describe beings in the heavenly temple whose bodies are made of light, whose garments are woven from kavod, whose forms are described with the same word family that 2nd Enoch uses for Enoch's replacement body. The match is not thematic, it is linguistic. The same root words show up in both texts to describe the same material, and those texts had no shared author, no shared library, no shared century. Puech dated the oldest Qumran fragments of the songs to roughly 75 BC. The Slavonic Enoch tradition is 1st century AD at the earliest, possibly later. The Ethiopian Enoch tradition goes back further, maybe 3rd century BC for the oldest sections. 3 independent traditions, 3 different centuries. One description, I keep wanting to say identical here, but that's too strong. The descriptions overlap in 5 specific places, and I can account for 4 of them through shared religious vocabulary. The fifth one I can't account for. It's a word for the texture of the replacement body. It appears in the songs and in 2nd Enoch, and it doesn't appear, as far as I can find, anywhere else in the surviving literature from that period. I've looked. The connection might be nothing. It might be a loan word from a source neither text cites. But I don't have that source, and neither does anyone I've been able to ask. The sequence across all three traditions, compressed, the environment around the presence is made of different material. The body reacts to the proximity and begins to lose its normal function. The body fails entirely. The body is replaced by something made of a substance the texts call glory, and the new body operates under different physical rules than the one it replaced. 5 stages, same order, every time. There's a reading of this that is comfortable. You can say the stages are literary convention. You can say Second Temple authors worked from the same tradition and the same idioms, and it would be strange if they didn't describe the experience in similar terms. That reading holds up mostly. It's the responsible position. I understand it. And then there's the other reading, the one where the sequence isn't convention, where it matches modern physics, not because the authors were channeling science, but because they were describing something that actually happened to tissue in the presence of something real, and they recorded what they saw with the words they had. Under that reading, kavod isn't a metaphor, and it never was. It's a physical emission with physical properties, and when a body gets close enough, this is what happens to it. In order, every time. I don't know which one is right. I know which one the text assumes. But I also know the text was written by people who believed it, and belief doesn't make a thing true. If you've read both versions of this passage, the Ethiopian and the Slavonic, tell me in the comments which one hit harder. I have my answer. I'm curious about yours. I will tell you this. If the second reading is correct, if kavod is something with mass and pressure, and the capacity to dissolve biological tissue, then the question the text is asking isn't theological, it's practical, it's engineering. Can a body be rebuilt fast enough to survive the thing that destroys it? And who decides which bodies get rebuilt? Because Enoch made it through, and the text is very clear that he survived only because something on the other side of that room decided to rebuild him before the dissolution became permanent and irreversible. But nobody in the text says everyone gets that. Nobody says the option is open. Enoch was taken. The word in every tradition is taken, not invited. He didn't choose it. Someone chose him. If the face of God does what the text says it does, then the question you should be asking isn't whether it's real. The question is whether you'd survive it, whether anyone was supposed to, whether the whole point of the 5 stages is that the original body was never meant to make it through, and the thing that walks out the other side was always going to be something else wearing your name. Enoch never went home. Both texts agree on that. He was taken up and he stayed up. Whatever walked into that room, whatever dissolved on that crystal floor, it didn't come back. Something else did, and the text says that something looked the same, spoke the same, remembered the same life, but it wasn't made of the same material. And nobody asked it if that was okay. John Blackwell, the text doesn't care whether you believe it.